One World Committee welcomes you to Virtual Living Library, where people are books who share their real-life stories with readers they may otherwise never meet, to dispel myths, stereotypes, and to promote connection and community. I hope you enjoy reading this book and hearing their story.
Thanks very much, Margie. It is such a delight to be part of the Living Library again. I think this is my third time, and it's such a valuable program. It really is, and I wish we could all be together in person like usual, but that's okay. This is the next best thing, and humans adapt, so this is a good example of that. I am going to be sharing my story and the lessons I learned from the experience, and for about maybe 15 minutes or so, maybe 20. Sometimes I can go on, and then I am happy to take questions. I've probably heard just about every question. I do a lot of public speaking on this subject when I can, and so I hope that the readers out there won't be shy about asking me anything. I am also a former teacher. I taught for 37 years, and so questions just do not faze me. So I really welcome any questions that anyone has. I realize that all of you listening today are coming at this subject from different places and for different reasons. It could be your own experience. It could be someone you know. It could be from an academic standpoint, if you're a psychology student or sociology or health or any number of areas. So I realize that you all might know some bits and pieces of what I'm going to share in terms of information. And that's okay, because I think it's really helpful to hear the same important things sometimes over and over and over again. But my story is unique and not. It is common with many others who have gone through this or are going through this. But my conclusion is somewhat unusual in the way that this whole transpired with my family. So being the teacher that I am, I'd like to start with some quick information so that we all come away a little bit more enlightened. And Margie, interrupt at any time if you need, or anyone else. I don't mind that at all. So how am I doing so far? Is this okay? Is this working?
Yes, you're doing great.
Good. Okay. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness, and a lot of people don't realize that. And that's part of the reason it is so high. Is due to people not understanding it. It's a very mysterious cluster of illnesses, and there's a lot we don't understand about it, and certainly in common knowledge we don't understand it. And so that contributes sometimes to the severity of it, but it's really important to take this seriously. Many people don't realize that it has such a high mortality rate. It strikes, if someone doesn't get treatment, it can strike as many as 20% in a lethal way. 20% can perish from it. And I emphasize without treatment, because with treatment, things are very, very helpful. And that's what I also want readers to come away with today, is that it's not a foregone conclusion. There's a lot of hope out there, and everyone's experience is different. And it's important, I think, to, as quickly as we can, address some of the myths about eating disorders, because I had to learn a lot when I was suddenly confronted with this in my own family. We tend to think that this is an ailment that hits white adolescent girls, middle-class girls, and it does. But the truth is that of the 30 million people in this country who struggle with an eating disorder, a third are men. We have 10 million men who are dealing with this, battling this every day. And theirs is often more silent because of the stigma. They don't come out with what they're going through. They're not open about it. They don't seek help. And many of these people are professional athletes, NFL players, professional golfers, baseball players, and so forth. And I've done a lot of research on this, and it really is staggering. The good news is that a lot of these professional athletes are beginning to come out now and write articles about this, allow themselves to be interviewed, seek help, and sort of become representatives of this third of the population. We also tend to think, again, with adolescent girls, that it can't strike other age groups. But the fact is that seniors are highly vulnerable to eating disorders. And if you think about it, it makes sense because many of them are alone, lonely. They might not see to the kind of eating and nutrition that they should. Some of them can't afford the kind of food that they should be having. Some of them have lost their appetite or their socialization to enjoy food. So that's a real problem in the senior community. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've had many cases of children as young as 5 or 6 who already begin to exhibit issues with eating. So these are some of the myths we need to dispel. Another thing I learned was that, people will think, well, you just need to eat. But I always tell people that when I talk about this, that this isn't about food. This is not an eating disorder. It's a behavioral disorder. It's a thinking disorder. And so we have to come at it that way, because food is not the problem and food is not the answer. Food is necessary to survive, but it doesn't tackle the problem. We also think that eating disorders is an ailment of the modern society, but there's real fascinating research that traces it back centuries and centuries. So it is nothing new. And I had to, begin to understand that. We tend to assume that those with eating disorders are coming from dysfunctional families. I imagine any family has a certain amount of dysfunction in the first place, but again, that isn't necessarily true. But the good news is that you can recover from an eating disorder without ever really being sure how this happened. And so that's encouraging, because, parents especially will beat themselves to death on why, and that's not always a prerequisite to recovery. As I said, 30 million people are suffering from some form of an eating disorder, of which there's a really wide spectrum now, much wider than we used to label. And eating disorders are on the rise in this country. And one of the reasons for that is due to social media, because you can find any rabbit hole you want, and you can find sites that actually encourage your disorder, that aid you in strategies and tactics to exacerbate it, which are really scary, rabbit holes to find yourself in. Just to hopefully get everyone else, I'm going to hit everyone with a fact that is not a fun fact. Every 62 minutes, someone dies from an eating disorder. And that is shocking. But I'm also here to tell you, as I said, that there's a lot of hope for it. And that's why my story is, I like to think it's valuable to people, because sometimes those that are in the middle of this, whether you're suffering from this yourself or someone you love, you can feel like there's no hope, but there is. And I get to be the messenger of that. So that's why I'm here today, is to share my story. I'm watching my time so that my teacher time management here. My daughter Jenna, that's the story. That's who our story is about. Was 17 years old when she, at least as I could tell, suddenly developed this. It really was quite fast. And my husband and I are both teachers, and this started in the summer. So luckily we were around all the time, and so that we could see this change in her behavior. And up until that time, now she was going into her senior year in high school in Gilbert. She went to Highland High School, and she just started developing strange behaviors. And she became quite obsessed with, again, not eating. And the thing with eating disorders is, as a mental disorder, it's an addiction. and you are addicted to not doing something, which is odd. It's kind of like how we're dealing with COVID. We're told what not, that we're not doing all these things, but of course this is very unhealthy. And one pivotal morning, this was in the summer, and she went running in the heat, and I couldn't understand why. She's a small girl to begin with. And she came back in and ran upstairs to her room, and I said, Jenna, you need to eat. You need to have breakfast. And she said, I already ate. And so I went into the kitchen, and I saw half a muffin on the counter. And I thought, oh, well, okay, she only had a half a muffin. Those were the big ones from Costco. And then something spoke to me and told me to put my hand in the garbage disposal. I don't know why, I just did. And there I found the other half of the muffin. And that was pivotal for me, because that's when, the room is thinning and I'm realizing she's lying about eating. Why would someone do that? And being a high school teacher, I was certainly aware of, the subject of eating disorders. I'd had plenty of students write about it in their English classes. And it still is a very easy thing to deny, not my child. But as the summer went on, we realized, and she was losing weight quickly, and we realized we had a problem. What added to our problem was the healthcare industry at the time. We went to our doctor, who basically said, well, here are some antacids, and maybe that'll help settle your stomach. This went on for a few months, and we were sort of in and out of trying to diagnose this. One professional who interviewed her for a half an hour concluded that she doesn't have an eating disorder because she doesn't think she's fat. And again, it's complicated, it's mysterious, and unfortunately, a lot of health professionals don't get the training they need in their medical studies to really deal with this. So I'm sympathetic to a point, because I know many of them would like to know more. This whole period I'm going to be sharing with you was a period of 1 year, but within 1 year, Jenna lost half her body weight. So we were in real trouble. She ended up in and out of residential treatment at Willow Creek, which isn't around anymore. And she finally came out of that and decided in her obstinate way that she wanted to be in charge of her recovery. So she stopped taking medication, she stopped counseling, she just decided she's going to do this on her own. And when I say that an eating disorder is a family affair, it really is, because it's to me, every mental illness is a family affair. Every illness is, and this is a mental illness, and it affects families tremendously, as you can imagine. Well, we have 2 sons, one older than Jenna, one younger. So it really put our family in a tailspin, and we had to learn a lot real fast. It's a kind of a complicated story, and I'm always watching my time, and I want to get to some good things that might help people. So I will say that at a certain point, almost a year into this, I had an epiphany, and Jenna had an epiphany. And I think these 2 things can help people. Up until then, I had been doing all the dancing, but I had to realize that it's not my dance. It's not, the music isn't being played for me. And I have to, Jenna was now 18, so she was the boss of her. And I had to acknowledge that and accept that she was an adult. And I had a confrontation with her when she was reaching rock bottom and hanging on by a thread. And I had to let her know that, you know what, you have the power. This is your story. You have the control, because sometimes there are control issues, certainly with this. And I had to tell her that I'm still with her, but I'm not doing it for her, that she has that power. And 3 days later, actually, I think it was like 2 days later, she had a true epiphany, and She went to an event at school that they were serving a tray of cookies, and suddenly she sort of snapped out of this. And that's what's unusual about our story. She really snapped out of this, and it's like this demon that had moved into her body for a year just moved out. And the next morning, the girl was back. It was in her eyes, it was in her posture, it was in her countenance, it was in her behavior. She really metamorphosed back into health. And it was fascinating to watch how the body is programmed to be well. So the body responded to this new nutrition, and her hair started growing back in, and her complexion looked healthier, and it's just fascinating to watch this. I'm going to tell you that Jenna is 20 years in full recovery. This is not a recent story, except it's going on all the time. She is very, very healthy. She lives in New York City. She's a writer. When it comes to food, again, she's always going to be a small girl, but she's very healthy about it. She had been in such a depression with this that it was hard to tell which caused which. But my good news is that she has maintained that recovery. Some people will suffer from this for their lifetimes, and many will perish, and then many will recover too. So we learned a lot in the process, and I'll just share this quickly so that I can leave time for any questions or comments, or if any of you have some good ideas too to share. As I said, this is such a strain on families, on family relationships, on their routines, on their time management and their finances. One of the things that this country is getting better about, but needs to keep doing work, is health insurance. The National Eating Disorders Association is vigilant in Washington, always fighting for this to get coverage for eating disorders, as like with any other illness, because otherwise residential treatment generally runs $1,000 a day. So for those, even with health insurance, this can be devastating. So it's really difficult financially. It's also difficult with loved ones, friends, coworkers who don't understand it, and they'll tend to say the wrong things. And so, we have to be very patient and forgiving of them too, because they don't know what they're saying. So if I could give readers out there the best, I didn't try to come up with 10, but it just comes to 10. I will say this. These are the best pieces of advice I could give anyone who is facing this on any level. One is to take it seriously. Don't avoid it. Don't deny it. Don't look the other way. Don't brush it under a rug. Don't think that, oh, well, not my child or not me. Take it seriously and seek intervention early, because that is the number one key to recovery, is early intervention. Research. I mean, I'm a teacher, I'm a student, and so this was my go-to, but learn every single thing you can on the subject. And one of the very best books that changed my life was The Secret Language of Eating Disorders by Peggy Claude Pierre. I don't have time to go into it, but if you're interested, and you can always reach out to me after this too, and I'll tell you more about it. Listen to the professional advice. Professionals will give you, those in treatment centers will give you family do's and don'ts, and be open to that, and be willing to change your own behavior and the way you view eating and food and so forth. There are wonderful Valley clinics around here for this, even including Gilbert has Ophelia's Place on Gilbert Road, just around Guadalupe and Gilbert Road. Terrific staff. Seek out friends who will listen to you and not judge. Try to not listen to those who mean well, but they're not helping you. So find good companionship that way. I would recommend that people avoid online chats. That's that rabbit hole again, where this isn't your story. You don't know these people, and so they can give you a whole lot of either bad advice or despair. For me as a writer, journaling helped me tremendously, and it helped Jenna. And in fact, when I was putting the book together, this is the book, and this is a collage that Jenna did while she was in treatment. But after I had written the book, before I found a publisher, Jenna was so healthy, she offered me all of her own journal entries from that period. And so they're embedded in our story so that you can really get into the mind of this young lady who was messed up in her thinking. So journaling helped both of us tremendously. And lastly, I would ask everyone out there to find unconditional love for both yourself and the person going through it. Especially if it is you going through it, that's the real key, is to unconditionally love yourself and others. For parents out there, it's easy to think, I caused this and I can fix it, and neither one is true. You have to still try to maintain a healthy, balanced, normal life as best you can. Take care of everyone else in your family, but take care of yourself. It's absolutely vitally important. So, I want to leave time for questions. I know these things always go so fast, but just know that those in this situation need a lot of love and patience, and our story is one of hope, and I'm wishing all wellness to everyone else out there. So I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Valerie. So we do have a question from Taylor. And Taylor, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask too. Otherwise, I will go ahead and ask for you. But if there are any follow-up questions, or if anybody else wants to ask anything, please feel free. So Taylor asks, how did her disorder affect her at school? And did any of her friends or teachers know what was truly going on?
Oh, that's an excellent question. It affected her immediately, because, again, when you think about food, it nourishes everything, not just fat, but muscle and brain cells and stamina and so forth. So it really affected her academically. As I said, she was her senior at Highland High School, and my husband and I early on called a meeting with all of her teachers, and they were phenomenal. Each of them cared so deeply about Jenna. A couple classes she had to drop. I think physics was one of them, no surprise. But a lot of her teachers did everything they could to accommodate her while she was in residential treatment. She did end up, as I said, having to drop a couple classes, and that started to put her graduation and then certainly going on to college in jeopardy. Her friends noticed right away. She just, again, when I say she lost half her body weight, I mean, it's astounding how quickly, the form changes. And they were very supportive of her even when she was in treatment. But Jenna, in her emotional distress, shut them out, and she disconnected from everybody. So it was a really difficult year. The good news is when Jenna came out of this, she kind of went into her own 12-step program, and she went out of her way to seek out every good, close best friend at Highland to apologize for her behavior, but to also try to explain and to ask for their reconciliation. So she really brought all those friends back. And 2 years ago when our book came out, we had a launch party, and she had friends there that she hadn't seen in 15 years since graduation. A couple of them came from out of state just to come and hug her again. So luckily she was able to graduate with her class, and she made up a couple of classes that summer in order to get into ASU in the fall. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Emily asks, what do you do or say to support someone should you not mention food or eating?
That's a tough one. If you're talking about the person who is struggling with it, I would recommend not talking about the ailment outright, unless the person is ready and wants to talk about it. So it's kind of like with other sensitive subjects, like someone who's going through grief, for example. You can say to them, I am here for you anytime. I will talk about anything. I will listen to you, first of all. I am here to listen, not give advice. I'm here to listen, and I want to be what you need me to be. So offer that first, and let them know that you accept them the way they are, not that you want them to stay healthy, but that's the unconditional love part. I started writing letters to Jenna, love letters, and it wasn't about the illness, it wasn't about life or family. It was, I love you when you're healthy and when you're not healthy. I love you when you, no matter, how you look. And so it's important to offer unconditional love and realize that you're not going to be the cure-all. You're not the professional, and so you can't carry the burden of, oh, what can I say to her to snap her out of it, or him. It won't work that way. So it's good for you to get your own advice, but simply give them unconditional love and listening, and tell them, I am so looking forward to when this is behind you. That kind of wording, that don't accept it as forever, and just let them know that you're here for them. I know that's a simplistic answer, but in the time we have, that's a start, I hope. Really almost anything, because it really is about the whole person. And so I really welcome you here, and I hope that you get something out of this. I'm going to share my personal story with you for about maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20, but then I want to open it up for questions. And I do a lot of speaking on this subject, and I've taught school for 37 years, so I really can't be too fazed by questions, any kind of question. So please feel free to ask me anything you'd like. Don't worry about it being too sensitive. I can handle it. So be thinking about whatever question or comment, something you'd just like to contribute to our conversation. I'm here to talk about eating disorders, and being the teacher I am, I'd also like to leave you with some information and enlightenment. And I realize that everyone comes at this from different places, as I said, but also different pools of information. So you might be aware of some of the information I'm going to share with you in general, or might be new to you, but I find all of it to be really important. So I'm hoping that it can help all of us here today. Eating disorders does have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. And that's something that a lot of people don't realize. It's a very mysterious cluster of diseases, of mental illness. And actually, there are a lot more labels on the spectrum than there ever used to be. So it's very complicated and mysterious. And that contributes to the mortality rate, because sometimes people are misguided in how to get help or when to get help. And so I've learned a lot in the process. So my story, luckily, ends very, very optimistically and full of hope. And that's the main thing I also want to impart on you is that there is a lot of hope out there for people suffering from this. And it really is a suffering. I don't have all the brilliant answers to this, but hopefully you can come away understanding it maybe a little bit better. I'd like to start with dispelling some of the myths of eating disorders, because that can help pave the way for us understanding it better and handling it better if it should confront us. One major myth is that it mostly affects, or entirely affects, young, white, middle-class teenage girls. That's usually what we first think of with eating disorders, particularly anorexia. But the fact is that 30 million, approximately 30 million people in this country struggle. If I go to sneeze, excuse me, it's just allergies. 30 million people struggle with eating disorders in this country. And the fact is that 1/3 of them are men. So 10 million people, men in this country, struggle with this every day. And that comes as a shock to a lot of people. but it's true. And the unfortunate thing is many men feel even more stigma attached to this. They're quiet about what they're going through. They don't seek the help and the intervention that they need. This applies to a lot of professional athletes, NFL players, Major League Baseball players, performers, all kinds of men struggle with this too. And that's one of the things we need to be considering because they need an outlet for this. Luckily, in the last 5 years or so, several notable men in sports have come out about their own eating issues. They have allowed themselves to be interviewed about it, and they've written articles even about it. And it so really is encouraging that we're tackling the stigma of this. Another common misconception is that, again, if you're just taking that adolescent girl, but the fact is that eating disorders are a real serious problem among the elderly. And if you think about it, elderly are very susceptible to it. They lose their appetite. They don't have the social environment that encourages healthy eating. They make good, nutritious meal 3 times a day. So a lot of older people become depressed, and that's linked to eating disorders for sure. So they're a real vulnerable group right now. On the other end of the spectrum, we've had cases as young as 5- and 6-year-old children, boys and girls, who have developed eating issues. So it's very, very serious. And 50% of us know someone who, or have gone through it ourselves. So it really is quite prevalent, and yet continues to have uphill battles for insurance coverage, for example, and residential treatment can cost about $1,000 a day. So some organizations like NEDA, National Eating Disorder Association, are fighting in Washington, D.C. all year, every year, for better health insurance coverage, and that's just my little, platform here, but that's really, really very important. Some of the other myths about eating disorders is that it's about food, and it isn't. Food is just the way this mental illness is exhibited. When I do speaking, I point out to people that it really isn't an eating disorder, it's a behavior disorder. It's a thinking and a feeling disorder, and food is what is used for this. But it is an addiction, and addictions create a sense of mistrust between people. You really are addicted to not doing something. And so it's really not about the food itself. And so that can be very confusing. So when people say, well, the answer is to just eat, you just need to eat, you'd be okay, they're missing the point of what's really going on here. There's also the misconception that this is a modern disorder within the second half of the 20th century, that this is a new age problem. But if anyone does research, they'll find that this has been documented centuries back. It's just really always been around. There's the myth that, well, this has to happen just in dysfunctional families. I'm not sure there's any fully, completely, perfectly functioning family anywhere anymore, but this is really not what's at cause necessarily. And one other last myth is that, well, you can't get well unless you can figure out why this happened. And the good news is that's not true. That recovery is not dependent on knowing why. And this is something I really had to learn, because as a parent, naturally, I was all about, well, why is this happening to my daughter? Why in our family? And that doesn't, not knowing why doesn't prohibit us from recovering. So that's really good news. So the fact is that eating disorders are on the rise in this country right now. And a large reason for that, a big contributing factor, is social media, no surprise, because you can find any rabbit hole you want out there, and any place to find information, and sometimes that's very destructive. So there are some sites where people are helping each other starve, where people are trading strategies and tactics and behaviors that will help people lose even more weight. So it's very frightening out there. It's really scary. And so we have to be aware of that, especially if it's someone you know who's going through this and you happen to find out that they are engaging in those kinds of chat rooms and so forth. They can be very, very destructive. Here's a sobering fact. Every 62 minutes, someone dies from an eating disorder. And most people would be really shocked to learn that, but it's important that we deal with facts, that we deal with reality of things. And I say that not to scare people, but to wake up people to the sobriety of this subject and how important this is and how seriously we have to take it. The good news is I also represent a story that ends quite positively. So there are people who will suffer from these things for years, for their whole lives. There are others who will perish, and then there's a nice big chunk who will be okay. And so I'm also here to provide that hope through my own story. So just a bit about what we went through in my family. We lived in Gilbert. We actually moved to Phoenix a year ago, but lived in Gilbert for 30 years. And I taught at Red Mountain High School for its first 20 years. And I have 3 children. My daughter's in the middle. And when Jenna was in the summer before her senior year in high school, she seemed to deteriorate rapidly to anorexia. It seemed to happen really quite quickly. And because my husband and I were both teachers, we were around all summer, which was good because then we were able to see abnormal behavior quickly. That doesn't mean we couldn't still deny what was going on, and that's common for you to just think, well, no, it can't be that. Even though I had taught high school kids, and so I was well aware of the issue. A lot of students had written essays about it, but pretty early on, I had to reconcile the fact that this is something serious. It happened on one really particular dramatic morning where in the middle of the heat, Jenna went out running and she came back in the morning and and she ran upstairs to her room and I said, Jenna, you need to eat. And she said, I already did. So I went into the kitchen and on the counter was half a muffin, one of the big kind from Costco. And so I thought, okay, well, so she had a half a muffin. And then Margie and I have talked about this before, but it was almost like a lightning bolt. Something told me to slip my hand into the disposal. And I did, and I found the dry crumbs of the other half a muffin. And that's when my world started spinning. And I kept thinking, she's lying about eating. Why would someone lie about eating? And that was really pivotal for me and for my family. And it still took a couple of months to get a sound diagnosis. One doctor said, well, she just has an upset stomach and here are some antacids. And another interviewed her for half an hour and said, well, she doesn't have an eating disorder because she doesn't think she's fat. So again, I tend to sympathize a bit with healthcare professionals because I think it's getting better now, but for many years they weren't getting the training they needed in this malady, and so they just weren't equipped to be able to know what to do and the right thing to say. So it was a real struggle for us with healthcare in order to get her the kind of intervention she needed. She was losing weight rapidly, and I will just say, I don't think I mentioned this yet, but by the time this experience was over, and it was a year from hell, our daughter lost half her body weight. And so we were down to rock bottom and in fear of losing her. Jenna was in and out of residential treatment through Willow Creek in Scottsdale, which is not around anymore. And then she gradually weaned herself off of that, but she still wasn't safe. And she reached a point after she turned 18 where she wanted complete control of the care. I'm not going to go to therapy anymore. I'm not going to be hospitalized. I'm not going to take my pills. And I'm not going to get counseling. That was pretty scary. And about 10 months into this, she really did hit rock bottom, and things were very scary for all of us. This affects the whole family. Um, my title is An Eating Disorder is a Family Affair, because whether you're going through it or a loved one is, every mental illness is a family affair. It affects everyone in the family. In our case, and in really anyone's case with this, it affects family routines. It affects your own behavior at the dinner table or in the kitchen. It affects your time management and your finances, again, especially if you're facing horrendous residential treatment expenses. It affects your relationship with your friends, because they often don't understand this. What is this going on? We don't understand this. And so they'll sometimes say the wrong things to you that don't help at all. And it affects your workplace. You know, I would still walk into that classroom and put on a happy face and have to go about teaching high school English. So it really is a family affair. I reached a point with Jenna where I realized that I'm doing all the dancing. I'm making the appointments, I'm doing the research and so forth. I'm getting counseling, but it's not my song. It's her song, it's her music. And I had this sort of epiphany. I finally said to her, you are in charge of this. You are in control of this. Sometimes it's control issues for some people. And I basically allowed her to take the reins of her own recovery. And 2 nights later, she came home from an event at school, some senior event, and she pronounced that she was done with this. And a lot of people go through that and they're not done with it. But by a real miracle, she was. And the next day when she came into the kitchen, she was back. Her eyes were clearer. Eating wasn't a challenge. For the next several months, we watched her regain weight, but more than that, the whole body is designed it's programmed to be healthy. So with this nourishment, her body responded quickly. Her hair started growing back in because she had been losing it. Her complexion was different. Her posture was different. It was really quite astounding. And I will fast forward to tell you that Jenna has been almost 20 years in complete recovery. So I am here with hope. She lives in New York City. She's a writer. She's very, very healthy mentally, emotionally, physically. And so that's why we wanted to share our story. Jenna had written, Jenna and I both keep journals. And when I wrote out our story to help others, she was so healthy by then and so kind and brave that she offered me her journals from that time period. So I embedded those in our book. This is our book. But I pointed out because this is a collage that she did while in residential treatment that speaks to her torment. But the beautiful thing about her journals is that you can see her come out of this and learn to love herself again and love her body and love life. And that's what, can happen to people, and that's the good news. As I said, there are a lot of strains on a family, and I'm watching my time because I want to leave enough time for some questions. But I just want to quick leave you with 10, and I didn't purposely make them 10, they just came to 10, but 10 things that I learned that helped me that may help you if you're going through this on any level in any direct way. First is to take this seriously. It is so easy for all of us to deny, look the other way, pretend it's not happening, figure, well, he or she or I will get over it, but you must take this seriously, and that means intervention. I have found that early intervention is absolutely key to recovery. The 20% of people who don't make it with this, it's usually because they didn't get help. So with help, with intervention, you have a much greater chance. Research, learn everything you can on the subject. One of the very best life-changing books I found on the subject is called The Secret Language of Eating Disorders by Peggy Claude Pierre. And it really, really helped me tremendously. It helped me to help Jenna to drain or to drown out the negative mind that she was drowning in. And I started writing her love letters, and that helped tremendously, I think. Seek professional advice if you are in residential treatment or someone else is, and the clinicians give you family do's and don'ts. Listen to them. It means changing your attitudes, changing your behaviors, but be willing to listen to that and be open to that. There are wonderful clinics here in the Valley, including Ophelia's Place. I always like to give a plug to in Gilbert. It's on Gilbert Road around Guadalupe. Wonderful staff there. Family support groups are great. Just try not to go into those same cyberspace rabbit holes of negativity because the people you don't know, because that's not helpful. Journaling, I always encourage. I journaled, as I said, and so did my daughter, and that led to our book, which was really helpful to us. And lastly, it's so important that you find unconditional love for yourself first and for anyone else going through this. If you're the parent, you have to know that you didn't cause it, you can't fix it, but you can be there with someone. You can't take on the burden of, your own neglect over this. You have to take good care of yourself or any other loved one or sibling. It's really hard on siblings because they're really lost. They don't know what to do about this. They don't understand it. And the same with loving that person who's struggling, and just let them know, I'm here, I'm listening to you, and you don't have to understand it, but you have to accept it and love them through that. So love usually ends up being the answer. And on that corny but wise note, I'll stop my talking and allow any questions or comments or contributions.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I don't know if it's the same for me, but there's a little triangle, and we haven't had video for a bit, but I could definitely understand you. And yeah, your words are very, very powerful. So we do have a question from Alexis. Thank you. How did you find the strength to let go? What influenced the decision? What was the part? Was it part fatigue, or was it like a conscious decision?
That's an excellent question, and I just want to let all of you know that Margie's making my contact information available, because I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time about this, or to speak to groups. That's an excellent question. Jenna had, as I said, really reached rock bottom. I hate to give away her weight because it would shock you all, but I ended up taking her to the doctor again. I thought she had stomach flu, but it really ended up being just more of this. And on the way home from that, again, it's like sometimes I think I'm just hitting thunderbolts. And we got back to the house, sat in the car, and it just came to me. And I think you're right in saying it's probably fatigue. It just kind of hit me that, you know what, nothing I'm doing is working. So I need to do something different. And so sometimes, you change the dance. So if you're doing a certain dance step, and excuse me just a minute, I don't want my computer to go out. And you're not working with a partner, it's not working. And I suggest this in any relationship, try doing something completely different. So I was so wrought out by then that I figured, well, it hasn't helped me to do all these things. What if I said, I'm not abandoning you, I'm walking with you, but I'm not walking for you. And I just was so desperate, I thought, well, I got to try something different. And it was very, very, very scary. And it seemed to have an impact on her. I hope that's kind of enough of an answer. Yeah, it was just, well, I'm going to try a different dance step. What have I got to lose? Because I'm losing her anyway.
That must have been so scary. And we have terrifying. 3 minutes. Yes. And there's another question.
Okay.
Do you think it was helpful to resend Jenna to the same treatment center when she relapsed?
I think it was, because the treatment that she was getting was sound treatment. It was worthwhile. What I'm finding is that it's a bit of Buddhism that, you know, I think it's when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So we sometimes need to keep hearing the good things over and over and over again until we're ready to really absorb them. So I think it still was very good because they did know what they were doing. And she was very resistant to it. But then years later, she said, no, I really was listening. And it really was planting seeds in my thinking for me, even though she couldn't admit it at the time.
We have 1 minute left.
Okay.
Oh,
did I cook
did you
Jenna's
cook?
meals?
Yes.
No, I would cook the meal for the family, and that's another important thing for families to try to stay as normal as possible. That's what's important for everybody. And I would not cook her meals. On the other hand, I couldn't force her to eat. So sometimes she didn't join us for meals. Sometimes she would come down hours later and eat weird stuff. So no, I didn't cook for her. I just cooked for the family.
Thank you so much. And so, Valerie, I know that you had said that it's kind of a mystery as to why people don't always get the answers as to what caused this. Was Jenna ever able to shed any light?
It's really weird, Margie. We had opposite theories, and we talked about it at one point when she was better. And my theory was that she's going into her senior year, and she had been involved, high achieving, popular, had friends, was having a great high school time. And I saw this as because we're very close, and we just didn't have a lot of the dysfunctional traits of some families. And I saw this as she is so deeply subconsciously stopping her growth, because when you stop eating, you stop growing and you stop maturing. And you maybe know this, but anorexics will develop it's called lanugo, something like that. It's sort of like baby fuzz, and they stop their menses, and all these other retardations to growth occur. It's like time out. I don't want to go further. And she thought it was just the opposite, that she was so done with high school. I'm so done with these immature seniors, and I just want to be, past high school. But years later, when we talked about it, she says, I think you were right. So I don't know. It's maybe a aberrant combination of the two, a struggle with, I have to move forward in life, I have to grow up, and that means leaving my cocoon, and that's scary. So then they kind of stop.
Thank you again, Valerie.
You're welcome. Thank you, Margie. Take good care of yourself.
Thank you, you too. Okay. Valerie, that was really powerful.
Very welcome, and I wish the best to all of you, especially during this time.